So, welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Myers, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar by Teachers for Teachers Unlocking Classroom Ready Science Resources, brought to you by the California Department of Education. This webinar is the second of three in the Tools for Teachers Shared Practices webinar series for this school year. Before we hand it off to our very knowledgeable presenters, we want to address a few housekeeping items. So with that, we will pass it over to our presenters for today. So please give a warm welcome to our friend Aaron Pecho from the CDE. Aaron, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Amy, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aaron Pacho, and I am an education programs consultant with the California Department of Education. My goal in the next few minutes is to provide a little background information on Tools for Teachers so you can smoothly access the platform. Tools for Teachers is an easy-to-use website that features lessons created by educators for educators. Resources are aligned to the California Next Generation Science Standards performance expectations. Lessons are also available that are aligned to ELA, math, and ELPAC content standards. Tools for Teachers resources focuses on the formative assessment process, which is the day-to-day learning opportunities that give educators information on student progress toward learning goals. Each Tools for Teachers lesson contains student and teacher-facing materials that include formative assessment and accessibility strategies to support a wide range of learners. And unlike the summative and interim assessments, Tools for Teachers features non-secure resources that can be distributed widely and posted on third-party websites like Google Classroom. Let's start with some common grounding on formative assessment. The image you see is a student running on top of a pile of books. The different colors of the books could represent different content or skills assessed at different times of the year. Tools for Teachers houses lessons that are situated in a comprehensive assessment system and helps teachers make formative decisions during instruction. If students are regularly engaged in skills and content standards during instruction, then they will be better prepared to demonstrate what they know and can do on an interim or summative assessment. For the webinar today, we are focusing on the formative assessment process for science lessons. Specifically, you will see how and where these supports are strategically embedded in the Tools for Teachers lesson plan and how they can support progress toward the California Next Generation Science Standards. And although science is the focus, all the strategies you will see today can be applied or modified for any content area. Included in your resource guide is a link to access Tools for Teachers. When you follow the link, you will be directed to the Tools for Teachers website. You will first select your state, which for us is California, and then click Go. Once you enter your credentials, you will have full access to the platform. If you do not have a TOMS account, you can self-register for Tools for Teachers with an appropriate LEA email address. If you administer the summative or interim assessments and already have a TOMS account, you do not need to self-register for Tools for Teachers. You already have access. Please note that you cannot self-register for Tools for Teachers with a personal email address. A link with instructions to self-register for Tools for Teachers has been provided to you in your resource guide. Once you are logged into Tools for Teachers, you can search for lessons by many search filters, including grade level and content area. I'd like to draw your attention to the 4 content areas for science, including Earth and Space Science, Life Science, Physical Science, and Engineering. You can also enter keywords to find the lessons that fit your needs. If you do not enter keywords, all the lessons that match your selected filters will be displayed. Additional optional science filters include DCI strand. Those can be considered specific topics within a content area. Ecosystems, for example, is a specific topic within the life science content area. You can also filter your results by performance expectation or the aligned standard. The more filters you select, the more specific your results. All the lessons our presenters have authored and are showcasing today are linked in your resource guide. Tools for Teachers houses 92 total science resources across all science domains and grade levels. This includes 59 elementary resources, 16 middle school resources, and 17 high school resources. And as Amy mentioned, Today's session is being presented as part of a larger opportunity to better understand tools for teachers and the resources offered. Today, we are focusing on classroom-ready science resources. In our next session, in a few weeks, we'll focus on professional learning resources to support English learners. A link to register for the upcoming training or access recordings and materials of the previous trainings have been provided to you in your resource guide. I am very excited today to introduce to you three amazing educators who are here to dive more deeply into a Tools for Teachers science resource that they have authored. Mary Elizabeth Kwan will be walking you through her fourth grade physical science resource. Heather McDonald will be walking you through her middle school life science resource. And Rudy Escobar will be walking you through his high school physical science resource. We hope that you will find something useful this afternoon as you plan high quality formative assessment opportunities for your students. As a reminder, if you have questions for our presenters, please use the Zoom Q&A chat feature. Some questions will be answered by the presenters or program staff in the background via the chat feature, and some questions may be held for the panel discussion at the end. With that, I will hand it off to Mary Elizabeth to start us off with her elementary science resource, Speedy Rollers.
Thank you, Erin. Hello, my name is Mary Elizabeth Kwan. I'm currently a sixth grade teacher at Sultana Sports and Science Academy in the Ontario Montclair School District. I've served in the Ontario Montclair School District for over 25 years in many capacities, from lunch ladies to district STEM TOSA. So I've done a little bit of everything. I hold a bachelor's degree in human communication studies and a master's degree in STEM education, as well as a multiple subject credential, a single subject credential in general science, and a secondary computer science authorization. As you can see, I never stop learning. I'm an out-of-the-box thinker, and when I approach the design process for lessons, I want to blend hands-on experiences with the joy of discovery, especially in the design for middle graders. In this age, they start to feel like they've mastered elementary school, and they get towards that like, hey, I'm the boss. And those opportunities to experience the joy of discovery is waning. Science is the perfect subject to bring that joy back into the classroom. As I stated, I currently work at Sultana Sports and Science Academy. We're a public school in the Ontario Montclair School District. Our school serves just over 600 PK through sixth grade students. We're a Title I school with a socioeconomically disadvantaged population at 89% and an English language learner population at 39%. 24% of our population participate in integrated special education. We have a community of about 100 adults on campus who support our students in their learning journeys. Now that you know a little bit about me and where I come from, let's get into the lesson. Today I'll be sharing Speedy Rollers, a fourth grade lesson designed to meet the NGSS PS 3-1 performance expectation, which is physical sciences dealing with the relationships between motion and speed. It's the foundations for learning Newtonian physics, like objects at rest tend to stay at rest and equal and opposite reactions, but we don't go into that at this age. We build the concept and the vocabulary foundation for students to discuss these ideas. In this lesson, students will learn about the relationship between speed and energy. At the fourth grade level, students will be making observations and documenting what they observe. They'll have a hands-on opportunity to gather firsthand information about objects as they speed down a track. They'll start to form basic vocabulary around the ideas of force and motion that will lay the foundation for the study of Newtonian physics in the middle school cluster of standards. Now that we have the background for the lesson, let's dig into the lesson progression. This lesson starts out with a video or in-person demonstration to pique the students' interest and activate their prior knowledge. There's a supplemental video suggested for this demo that guides the class through the questioning process, or the teacher can follow the instructions provided to provide that same opportunity live. After making some preliminary observations, students will participate in a Four Corners activity to check for prior knowledge. After informally assessing the students' prior knowledge of the concepts and the vocabulary, the teacher will then lead the discovery portion of the lesson, the crux of it, the fast and slow bowling experience. Students will get to discuss, discover, experiment, and gather data. Students will set up their own tracks and gather data about what happens in collisions at slow speed compared to collisions at high speed. The purpose of this activity is to elicit the natural vocabulary that students are using around the concepts of energy and speed. The teacher can also start to plant vocabulary as they circulate the room, checking in on groups. The students will collect their data and start to build ideas on the student delayed data collection handout. Teachers will then facilitate a graffiti board activity. If you haven't used this before, it's a great opportunity for students to express their ideas and share them with each other. After gathering data, students create a model on the graffiti board of the fast and slow bowling. The process will include interaction between the students and the teacher in writing. This is a great time for the teachers to pose questions and prompt students to use vocabulary words in their models. Students can then share their models verbally with their peers to give them practice using the language around speed and energy. The students will then use the Reflect Connect handout to summarize their thinking and start to develop an explanation. Finally, they'll complete an exit ticket for the teacher, which is included on the Reflect Connect handout. There are 3 handouts included in the lesson that guide the teacher and the students through the process. The first is the teacher activity document, which will guide the teacher through the lesson. The teacher activity document contains an instruction sheet for setting up the experiment for the students, instructions for guiding the hands-on activity, and a set of the student handouts. It also includes 2 student handouts. The first is the student data collection sheet. It will help guide the students through the collection of data and the transfer of data into written explanations. It contains question prompts for assessing prior understanding, instructions for the students to conduct the trials, and a simplified data collection sheet. Since the focus for the learning is to construct an explanation, I used words on the data table instead of focusing on numbers. This will provide a reference to the students as they transfer their thinking from the data table into a written summary. But teachers can feel free to have students collect both numerical data and the anecdotal data from the table. The other student document is the reflection connection sheet. This sheet is used after the exploration to help the students summarize their thinking into writing. Prompts are provided for the students to start the thinking process. The prompts include the use of specific standards-based vocabulary. This handout provides a scaffolded approach to language development needed to demonstrate the understanding of this performance expectation. I want to highlight some of the opportunities for formative assessment and, most importantly, feedback that are embedded throughout this lesson. A 4 corners activity is used to informally assess the student's level of understanding before the lesson begins. Since the focus of the lesson is using evidence to explain, a prompt is used to elicit that evidence from the student's prior thinking. A prompt I might use for this activity is, I noticed that there's a marble at the end of the track. I think the stationary marble will stay in place after the collision because it's bigger than the moving marble. This prompt demonstrates the level of academic language I want the students to use on their own when they get to the corner that they've chosen. The 4 corners are labeled strongly agree, disagree, and strongly disagree. When students get to the corners, they'll discuss the reason that they chose that corner. At this time, the teacher can take anecdotal records of where the students moved to and some of the reasons that the students provided for their choices. The teacher may even add an anchor chart to the classroom or a T-chart for the I used to think, but now I think T-chart. The reasons that the students give during this activity can be added to that I used to think side. And then later we can add ideas to that, but now I think. There are 2 key factors to this lesson: experience and vocabulary. Throughout the main experience, fast and slow bowling, it's important that the teacher is circulating and encouraging vocabulary acquisition and practice. When the students can provide a definition of an experience in their own words, then the teacher can provide the vocabulary word that summarizes their experience of that lesson. This gives the students the freedom to have the joy of discovery with the layering of vocabulary. It's close to Stephen Krashen's comprehensible input model for communication, in which meaningful experience will help students acquire, not just learn language through exposure and practice. So instead of front loading the vocabulary. The students are discovering the vocabulary along the way with the concept and an experience to link it all to. The learning is then reinforced through the graffiti board process. After the learning has taken place, in the hands-on activity, students are challenged to share their thoughts. First, they reflect on the activity, then they share ideas on the graffiti board. In the graffiti board activity, the same question is posed to the students from the beginning of the lesson. What do you think will happen to the marble at the end of the track? The students use the graffiti board to share their ideas silently. So this is completely a silent classroom when you're working on this. This will help the students transfer ideas from their thinking into drawing and writing. Both drawing and writing are acceptable on a graffiti board. During this time, the teacher can observe student thinking on paper, they can make informal observations on the learning and provide probing questions to the students. My suggestion for this time is that during the graffiti boards, the teacher should provide feedback in the form of probing questions only in writing on the graffiti board. This way, you'll maintain the silence in the classroom and provide an opportunity for anyone who interacts with the graffiti board to practice in the reflection process. This provides the opportunity for everyone in the classroom to become part of one learning community. After a silent period of writing, the students have the opportunity to collaborate with their peers at their own table. They can make revisions to their thinking and learn from one another. During this time, the teacher will prompt the students to share what they've learned about energy and its relationship to speed. This activity culminates in the group writing a summary. So you can see that transition from drawing, modeling, talking, writing. This is the collaborative part of the language development process. The teacher will write these summaries on the anchor chart under the heading, "What we have learned about energy," and "What have we learned about speed and energy." The final assessment of this lesson is the exit ticket. It's included in the bottom of the Connect Reflect handout. It provides a guided opportunity for students to share their learning about the connections between speed and energy and the evidence they collected to support that thinking. It's completed independently. It's the assessment of the student's progress towards performance expectation of providing an explanation of the relationship with speed and energy with evidence. So let's talk about accessibility. This is a lesson that all of the students can partake in. Consideration for students with specific needs can be addressed using the accessibility strategies provided in the lesson. One accessibility strategy that I'd like to highlight is the read aloud strategy. I suggest that you use this for all the handouts. It's helpful for all students to have the opportunity to hear and read along as you go through the handouts. Also, the vocabulary that's been used in the classroom verbally throughout the lesson is incorporated into the handouts. That's why read aloud is so important. If the teacher hasn't had the opportunity to use the vocabulary with the class, the handout can spark the conversations around the key vocabulary terms. So it's a reminder for the students and the teacher as well. There may be times when students have difficulty writing or communicating their thoughts on paper. Another strategy you can use is scribe. For data collection handout and the reflection, I'd suggest asking another student to be the scribe. That will lower the emotional stakes for the student who's trying to process their thinking and communicate it into writing. But for the exit ticket, I would suggest having an adult to capture the student's thinking for them, since this is their final summary of their thinking for this lesson, and it's more of an assessment of their learning for the whole lesson. Finally, the use of the word wall when developing vocabulary makes this lesson accessible for all students. I will tell you, this tool is really useful in my classroom. We have a lot of students who miss school on a regular basis, and having a word wall to document the learning and the language that we've used on days that they've missed gives them a reference point when they come back to check in from that absence. So it really provides that scaffolded opportunity to catch up. More ideas for using this lesson. Like, this is a great lesson to go both backwards in the curriculum and forwards in the curriculum. But we're going to talk a little bit about some ideas that you can use that will help the kids access the information now. So one of the things that I really thought about when I was developing the lesson was how could we introduce technology into this? And a supplemental way of doing this, because I know not everybody has the same technology, is to use slow motion filming. If you have access to phones or iPads or cameras, the students can film what's happening during the fast and slow bowling and then speed it up and slow it down to see what's happening in each of those scenarios. You can also have the students document how far the blocks were displaced by rolling the marbles. That was what I was talking about earlier about collecting numerical data. You could actually have them measure the distance of displacement or how much those blocks moved from their original spot. You could have them use centimeters or empirical measurement for that if you want to. And then having students draw their own model, labeling it, and showing movement are really important for building understanding in this concept. But the important thing about after that model is that you have the students talk about that model repeatedly with other students and with teacher feedback. During this time, the teacher can give feedback and remind the students to incorporate the scientific vocabulary right into their model so that it's easier to write their explanation from. And then finally, like I was saying, planning for this. This is a document. This is a lesson that you can use to review prior concepts or to build for future concepts. So a lot of times, the last time that the kids have seen this type of lesson or this concept in science was kindergarten, when they were building their foundational learning of pushes and pulls. And it's likely that they have experience with the concepts, but not necessarily that primary foundational vocabulary of pushes and pulls to go along with this specific science concept. So this is a good review of that language before you build the new language into it. It can also be used as an opportunity to build vocabulary around the idea of motion. Finally, this lesson specifically develops the concept and vocabulary of the relationship between speed and energy, and the students will be collecting evidence. The reflection connection handout and exit ticket help the students connect that information that they've learned from gathering evidence and preparing them to write an explanation. However, further lessons are needed to pull this evidence together into that formal explanation process. And as I mentioned before, this really is the foundation for that Newtonian physics in the middle school. So I encourage you to use this lesson with your fourth graders.
All right. Thank you, Mary Elizabeth. And just a reminder, if you have any questions for Mary Elizabeth about the resource that she just shared, please use the Zoom Q&A chat feature. I would now like to hand it off to Heather McDonald, who will talk to you about her middle school life science resource, All Systems Go. Take it away, Heather.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Heather McDonald, and I'm the secondary science TOSA. That's a teacher on special assignment because we don't have enough acronyms in education for the Riverside Unified School District. When I was a kid, I very much wanted to be an entomologist, and I earned my bachelor's in entomology from the University of California, Riverside. I was ready to spend my life with bugs when a fateful day led me to change my path to teaching. And after graduating from UCR, I earned a master's degree in science education from the University of Arizona. I then spent 14 years teaching science to 6th, 7th, and 8th graders before my current position with RUSD, where I've been for the last 7 years. I also realized at 40 that I'm a gamer. Although looking back on the endless hours playing games as a child and adult, I probably should have realized it sooner. Nintendo probably owes me money. Anyways. In my district, we have 49 schools and more than 38,000 students. Of that, our English learners make up 17%, while our special ed population is 14%. 74% of our students are socioeconomically disadvantaged. So let's talk about the performance expectation MSLS 1.3. Use arguments supported by evidence for how the body is a system of interacting subsystems composed of groups of cells. I was excited to write a resource for this performance expectation because I saw an opportunity to create a lesson that emphasizes the connections and dependence between body systems rather than learning about them in isolation. I wanted to go beyond knowing the digestive system, the respiratory system, the circulatory system, and instead give students an opportunity to be able to explain how they are connected and dependent upon each other. So I created this resource using my gamer mind so students could figure out that systems are dependent upon one another through a collaborative gameplay activity. The phenomenon in this activity involves two people who run a race to see who is fastest. After they finish, both are breathing heavily, cannot talk, their hearts are beating fast, and they are tired. What could have caused this change in them so quickly? We see people exercise and be out of breath and sweaty afterwards, but have you ever wondered why? I don't get out of breath by buying groceries or pumping gasoline. Oh, it's really weird when I do that because I have an electric vehicle. Students work to make sense of the phenomenon by first drafting an initial claim and then creating a physical model using themselves to simulate the race from the cellular point of view to explain why the runners are out of breath. So picture this. In one area of your classroom is a food station where molecules of glucose, proteins, and amino acids are scattered about. In another area is the atmosphere station where oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and water molecules are waiting to be collected by students who will be taking on specific roles of the human body. In groups of 6, each student has specific tasks that they must carry out to fulfill their role. As students carry out their tasks, they are simulating processes inside the body during the race with the ultimate goal of creating energy to keep the runner going. The activity begins with the teacher informing each group that they need to make one molecule of energy as quickly as they can. So, the student portrayed as a circulatory system instructs the student portrayed as the inhale respiratory system to go get molecules of oxygen. As they go visit the atmosphere station to get those molecules, the circulatory system then asks for a molecule of glucose from the digestive system. Once the circulatory system has 6 oxygen molecules and 1 glucose molecule from the other systems, they deliver them to the student portrayed as the mitochondria. There, this student will lay the molecules in specific locations on a mat, which represents the inside of the mitochondria. From there, a chemical reaction takes place. So the student portraying the chemical reaction will go to the atmosphere station and collect 6 carbon dioxide and 6 water molecules and return them to the mitochondria. These are also placed in specific areas on the mat. Having completed the process, the mitochondria gets to add 1 energy molecule to the mat. Hooray! The carbon dioxide and water molecules are then given to the circulatory system, who then gives them to the exhale respiratory system, where they are returned to the atmosphere station. Meanwhile, the glucose and oxygen molecules are given to the chemical reaction student, who returns them to their station. And that is what it takes to make 1 energy molecule to keep the runner going in the race. But just as energy demand increases the longer a person exercises, so does the demand on students to carry out their roles. After making their first energy molecule, the teacher will announce that the runner now needs 3 more energy molecules. And after only 2 minutes, the teacher will announce that the runner is getting tired and the body needs even more energy to keep up. They now need to make 6 energy molecules. At this point, students are scrambling back and forth between their stations and each other, talking animatedly and trying to fulfill the ever-increasing request put on them. Inevitably, they will not be able to keep up. And just as the runners are out of breath in the phenomenon, the students will be too. It's a lot of fun. Just don't be surprised if students ask to do it again or for just a little more time. Once students have completed this part of the activity, they use their experience to create a group model with drawings, arrows, and descriptions on a poster, and paired with evidence cards that provide additional information regarding body systems and energy use, they revise their initial claims. The activity finishes with students using evidence and reasoning from the simulation and the cards to support their claim. Students record their claims, evidence, and reasoning on a student handout. So everything you need to teach this activity is included, and no additional costs or materials are needed. I wanted to create a resource that is accessible and affordable for any classroom and still allows students the opportunity to make sense of scientific phenomena. The materials for this activity were intentionally created to provide students with an understanding that helps them master the performance expectation without going into details that can confuse students. For example, the Making Energy mat emphasizes that students are making energy, but they do not need to understand or go into details regarding cellular respiration. Also, the energy that they're creating is essentially ATP. However, the word ATP has been replaced with the term energy molecule. This is intended because students at this level may find the acronym ATP confusing and complex. The name was simplified because it is a complex molecule, and students usually do not learn about this term until high school. I wanted to highlight some of the formative assessment strategies used in this lesson. These are fantastic tools to gather and interpret evidence of student thinking on the fly. And they include Quick Write, Think, Pair, Share, Notice Wonder, Exit Ticket, and I wanted to speak in a little more detail on one strategy, the Gallery Walk. The power of this strategy to make student thinking visible and to assess where student ideas are is unmatched, in my opinion. I mentioned earlier that after students complete the physical model, they then create a scientific model of the process on posters. As these posters are displayed, this is an excellent opportunity for teachers to formatively assess the ideas students have about the phenomena they experienced. It's also an opportunity for students to evaluate their own work by observing others and discussing how students develop their ideas. Accessibility strategies are also included in this lesson. They include sentence frames and a word wall. Sentence frames help make writing claim, evidence, and reasoning more accessible, especially for our English learners. However, I've observed most students especially struggle with writing their reasoning because they often think their evidence is reasoning. Sentence frames help students organize their ideas cohesively. Science language, as we know, is its own unique language that is learned like any other, and having scientific vocabulary easily accessible helps, which is why a word wall is also included in this lesson. Word walls are even more effective if students are involved with determining which words make it to the wall. This is also an opportunity for students to share names they have for items, which breaks down language barriers. For example, I call this a glass. To me, es una taza, and give students opportunities for correct scientific terms. For example, we all have different names for this item, which is great. The scientific term for this object is beaker. This lesson is meant to provide students with a way to figure out that the body is a system of interacting subsystems through sense making so they can work towards mastery of MSLS 1-3. This lesson is intended to be part of an integrated NGSS course in a unit that has an overarching theme of how matter works within systems. However, this lesson can also easily fit within a discipline-specific course that examines a cell and how the cell is one part of a larger system. I wanted to close by providing some tips when considering planning and lesson options. While this lesson isn't time-specific, as in it doesn't need to be done at a certain time to accommodate natural processes, such as sunlight or phases of the moon, advanced planning is necessary to prepare for this lesson. Multiple items will need to be printed and cut out, and using cardstock and/or lamination is recommended for multiple uses. That being said, food and atmosphere molecules are small pieces that are easily lost. So it may be more worthwhile to simply print and cut every time rather than using cardstock and lamination. In fact, these pieces will be the gift that keeps on giving. If you don't find a random molecule piece covered in dust in the corner of your classroom in late May, I'd be shocked. It may also be necessary to spend more time modeling how to perform each student role depending on your students. You know your students best. Since students will be working in groups for this lesson, teachers will want to be really intentional about how they support that collaboration. Teachers will want to be aware not only of student disagreements, but also those quieter moments. when a student just goes along with their peers because they might lack the confidence or the language to speak up for themselves. If this happens, here are some things to consider. Allow students to disagree and to change their minds. It's important to validate all voices by emphasizing that any idea offered should be considered and evaluated based on the evidence. Foster an environment where students are expected to provide a viewpoint, even if they're a little unsure about it. If students are afraid to speak up, it may be because they've been taught not to be the voice of dissent. Teachers can give them an opportunity to write their thoughts on a sticky note to share with their peers. Finally, teachers can create a culture that emphasizes that figuring out science concepts is a process, and setbacks are a necessary part of that process. This is not failure, it is learning. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Heather. If you have questions for Heather, please use the Zoom Q&A chat feature. We will address those at the end. I'd now like to hand it off to Rudy Escobar, who will go over his high school physical science resource, Let's Get Down. Take it away, Rudy.
Thank you, Aaron. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rudy Escobar. I'm a STEM and computer science coordinator at the Stanislaus County Office of Education. I have a master's degree in STEAM education, a chemistry single subject credential, computer science credential, and I have a chemical engineering background and a chemistry degree as well. I am part of the NGSS Collaborative, co-chair for the Computer Science for California Coalition, also known as CS4CA, and I've been a leader in many science and computer science initiatives throughout the state and nationally. In my previous roles, I taught high school chemistry, engineering, robotics, and computer science. Through all my roles, I advocate for science and computer science education for all students, and that is really my priority. Our county office serves 25 school districts with approximately 107,000 students from transitional kindergarten through 12th grade. We have 23% English language learners, 13% special education, and 72% socioeconomic disadvantaged students. The resource I will talk about is aligned to the performance expectation for high school PS2-3, which is apply science and engineering ideas to design, evaluate, and refine a device that minimizes the force on a microscopic object during a collision. The science and engineering practice is constructing explanation and designing solutions. The disciplinary core idea has three parts: forces in motion, defining and delimiting an engineering problem, optimizing and designing a solution. And the cross-cutting concept is cause and effect. This resource is also related to another resource in Tools for Teachers called Now That's a Slam, which addresses high school PS2-2, which I also wrote. This resource is a classroom-ready instructional resource and is designed to support formative assessment practices, helping teachers understand that students know and what students know and where they need to support. So as Aaron mentioned, the title of this resource is Let's Get Down, and hopefully you'll get the hint of why we called it Let's Get Down. This is an introductory resource to engage students in learning about momentum and collisions. Students also work towards applying scientific and engineering ideas to design, evaluate, and refine a device that minimizes force on a microscopic object during a collision. The resource also connects science to real humanitarian challenges, such as safely delivering supplies to isolated communities. And students design a parachute device that stays in the air as long as possible by manipulating these forces. So the lesson begins with using a notice, wonder, and field chart and providing an anchoring problem and personal connection in which students analyze images of real food drops. Through this, the teacher connects the scenario to local events such as earthquakes or fires and discusses ways for communities might receive the help. The additional column that you see here in the Notice and Wonder chart was adopted from OpenSciEd, and this is called the Field column. And this provides an opportunity for students to empathize and connect to the issue, making the inquiry problem more meaningful for them and really making it relatable. This is a great opportunity to obtain information from your students about how they can relate to the problem and make it really related to them as well. Students are also provided the opportunity to share with the whole class about what their feelings are, what they're wondering, and what they're noticing, and the teacher is recording that information on the chart. During the investigation, students built a parachute system using simple materials such as large coffee filters, or they can use napkins, cotton strings, large paper clips, small paper clips, medium paper clips, measuring tape, stopwatch or a phone, and a pair of scissors. Students test the device making different measurements and then compare results across paperclip sizes to see how mass and forces interact. Teachers are provided with the option to add a scale if they would like to weigh out the load, but it's an optional, it's not necessary. Students can still actually do the investigation without it. Throughout and after the investigation, students are asked to make a T-chart on their notebook to create their initial model on the left side of the chart. Students then create an initial model showing forces such as gravity and air resistance. Students then are asked to walk with their notebooks and do a gallery walk to observe each one of the initial models and then record what similarities and differences they observe based on their own model. Teachers are recommended to observe the students' models during the gallery walk and use this information to prepare how to begin with the scientist circle that I will talk to you in a minute about it. And then also the teacher is encouraged to collect vocabulary that it can be also used for the scientist circle. For example, if a student focuses on the force that is caused by the air interacting with the canopy, a teacher might prepare a question that says, how can we label this force? Or how do we represent it? So through a scientist circle, students engage in a structured discussion to create a class consensus model. As a class, students identify key forces acting on the parachute and agree on the overall design, features, and effective fall time. The resource provides a protocol and discussion prompts that can support teachers for having successful scientist circle, as you can see here in the slide. The teacher is able to provide students with a discussion prompt to present data and to support their claims using the handout provided. For example, the teacher can guide students to one of the bolded titles on the handout, such as give evidence for your idea or claim, and use a sentence frame such as the reason I think that is, which it can help the students support their responses with a stronger connection. Using sentence frames are helpful to use with all students during the scientist circle. And it's not only for English learners. It can be a support for all students. Using the sentence frames can also help students and the teacher to expand on the conversation. So if the teacher feels like it's not expanding as much, the teacher can use those sentence frames to expand the conversation in the scientist circle. So you heard me talk about the scientist circle. So what is the scientist circle? The scientist circle is also another adaptation. In this particular formative assessment, which is the highlight of this resource, is adapted from a Socratic seminar formative assessment that is in Tools for Teachers. This scientist circle helps students make sense of their investigation by bringing their data, observations, and initial models together. And the scientist circle allows students to expand on their thinking in a structured manner. The scientist circle also promotes equitable student talk where everyone contributes to ideas using sentence frames and discussion prompts. So in this moment, the teacher is actually collecting ideas from all students and putting it in a board or in a digital board or in a poster where the teacher is actually writing and drawing and putting all the forces that the students are coming to consensus into what should be on the model. In this particular resource, to the scientist circle, students work together to build that class consensus model, showing how forces such as gravity and air resistance act on the parachute system. Students are also taught about what consensus means. It doesn't mean that it's a democratic yes or no. It means that they all come together and they agree that it should be on their initial model. when students are doing this, they use that T-chart that they used with their initial model during their investigation, and they can stand or sit on in a circle with the teacher as part of the circle. The teacher does not get in the middle. The teacher does not be is not the center of the conversation. The teacher's part of the circle with all the students. The teacher can begin with a question such as, "What forces do you think interact with the parachute?" The teacher draws and develops consensus on an initial model that describes the components and forces involved during the parachute drop and evaluates the design on the device based on the effect of changing forces on that device. The scientist circle should not last more than 10 to 15 minutes. However, there has to be a consensus that the initial model has to at least have the forces that are being investigated, which is part of the learning objective. The teacher summarizes the consensus model with the students at the end and lets them know that they will continue to revise the model. This means that that model is not the end. It's just one model that they're starting to make sense of it, and they're going to continue building on that model throughout the unit. This shared model strengthens understanding and prepares students to apply science ideas to real engineering challenges, like reducing impact during a supply drop. So as I mentioned at the beginning, there's another resource that is attached to that. They continue talking about how that you can affect the impact drop and how it affects when it hits the ground. So there's multiple things that you can connect to this lesson as well. So at the end of this resource, through an exit ticket, students are asked two questions. How can the parachute be improved for heavier loads? And how can it be applied to humanitarian aid? The reason of these two questions is because one of them connects to the concept. It connects to what students need to know, and this helps the teacher to understand what was understood about the concept throughout the investigation and the consensus initial model. But it also, the second question connects to what their own relevance and how they want to support and help someone in need. So the formative assessment strategy just provides teacher that feedback about what students understood with those concepts. And in this resource, also the teacher is provided with recommendations based on the understanding of what students have. So there's also recommendations in this resource of depending on what the students response, that's how the teacher can actually be guided to go into the next lesson or go back and do something different. And this is how this resource ends. So now I am going to turn it back to Aaron to facilitate questions and answers.
Thank you, Rudy. And thanks, Amy. I am going to start our Q&A session, I'm going to quickly grab screen share so that I can show tools for teachers really quickly. So there was a question in the Q&A about how to access tools for teachers and what resources can be seen. So this is what the tools for teachers looks like when you log on. So I've already logged in. I've selected California. I've clicked go, entered my credentials. Once I'm here, now I can search for lessons, and that's just the search lesson plans button. From there, you see all the filters that I mentioned previously earlier in the presentation. Science is at the bottom. There's ELA, math, and science. And when you select a content area, all of those resources will show up. So as you can see, we have 92 results showing, and all of these are science lessons. I imagine there might be someone out there that wants to go through each one and click and find the one that's right for them. If you want to refine your search, you can add more filter specifications, and your search results will refine to more specific results. And once you're in a Tools for Teachers lesson plan, it's all kind of listed out there for you, the lesson objectives, how to use the lesson materials, the lesson options, and also the educator that authored the lesson. And hopefully that overview provides a good some good tips for you on how to access Tools for Teachers. And like I said, all of the lessons that our presenters went through today are available on Tools for Teachers. All right. With that, we can start with some questions. So I do have one question for each of our presenters, and they are regarding the forward assessment strategy that they went through. So we'll start with Mary Elizabeth, who went through her elementary resource. Mary Elizabeth, you mentioned Four Corners was a way that you collect prior knowledge from your students. If teachers have not done this activity with their students, what advice do you have to get started?
Well, Four Corners is really pretty easy. You have to pose a a statement to the students, and then you give them the four choices: agree, strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree. You have to give them some background first. You have to tell them and set the expectations for your classroom, of course. Like, how are we going to move to the different corners? What to do when they get to the corners, and model that conversation a little bit before you send them off. But I love this strategy. I use it for a lot of different things in my classroom just to get that quick idea. It can also be used for things like multiple choice questions. If you want to go through and test like how they did on some multiple choice, send them to the corners. They can talk about their reasoning for that as well. But yeah, really, it's just setting the expectation of how you want the kids to move in the classroom, what the four corners mean, and then what you want them to do when they get there. Is that
That answers it. Thank you, Mary
okay?
Elizabeth.
Thank you.
The next one is for Heather. You talked about gallery walk as a way to lift up what students know about a particular topic. What are some strategies that you use to get individual student feedback on a group activity like a gallery walk?
That's a great question, Erin. I would recommend a tried and true way of using Post-it notes. So having all of the posters of student information around the room, and give each student a Post-it note as they walk and observe the other posters. It's an opportunity for them to write down something they notice and wonder, or something that they've learned, an idea I used to think, or now I think, on that Post-it note, and attach it to a poster. Another thing I might recommend is for students to actually write that information on the sticky side of the Post-it note, and to write their name on the front side of the Post-it note. That way, when they stick it and attach it to the posters, students can't just walk by and copy what other student ideas are, but they have to actually think and consider what it is that they're seeing. And by putting their name on it, they are having ownership of what it is that they're saying. So then once the gallery walk is complete, groups can go around and see the feedback that other students have offered, other ideas that gave them insight, and be able to use that information to revise their models and their thinking if necessary.
Great. Thanks, Heather. And I didn't say this in the beginning. I probably should have. If you have additional questions that come up while we're hosting this short Q&A session, please continue including them in the Q&A chat, Zoom chat feature, and we'll get them answered. Next one's for Rudy. You mentioned your scientist circle as a adaptation of a Socratic seminar. How often do you conduct scientist circles throughout the year with your students? Do students ever check out of them? What is your strategy for keeping them engaged?
Good question, Aaron. I think let me start with the ending point of what you just talked about. As I mentioned during my presentation, is you do not want to have the scientist circle more than 10 to 15 minutes to keep students engaged. That's important to keep them engaged. Otherwise, it begins to get very routine, and then students are most likely going to check out. The other thing is to keep the circle the scientist circle going. It's important to have those sentence frames and communicating with them and asking those questions, what we call back pocket questions, to be able to pick that up as well. As for when to do the scientist circle, my recommendation is not doing it at the beginning of the semester, or the time that they start, because you still need to establish a routine. When I was in the classroom, I like to start with something that is not even related to science. Just have a quick discussion to come to consensus, so that way students get used to the routine. And as they get used to the routine, then you can bring in the scientist circle as a way to come to consensus. I think that sometimes the scientist circle gets confused with just getting to a final answer. And it's not about a final answer, it's really just to build knowledge together as a community and coming up with some common vocabulary, common idea, so they can move forward and continue doing that. So I would recommend the scientist circle to be not at the beginning, but once you get into the routine, you can use it after a unit, um, before you go into a final exetic or any other summative things that you're gonna do. That should be more of really bringing ideas together. So anytime that you want to bring an idea together, that's a good point to do it.
Great. Thanks, Rudy. And I have one last question, and it's a shared question. It's one for all of you. What is one thing that changed? What is one thing that you changed about your teaching as you developed and taught your lesson? And I'll let you popcorn it around.
I can begin.
Great.
I changed how students interacted with phenomena. So I used to present ideas and then do activities and then have them experience phenomena. Writing this really helped me see that for students to make sense of what they're trying to figure out, they needed to experience it themselves and let their prior knowledge and background information influence that activity, and then bring in more evidence and information for them to put it all together and make sense in a foundation. So introducing the phenomena first and doing an activity before anything else.
I can follow up on that. I for me, I think it's been a while, but for me, I the main part is as high school and being in high school, in where we typically tend to do a lot of content. It's really changing it to be more about slowing it down and communicating and having a relationship, just like what Heather just mentioned about really having discussions about phenomena and really talking about the phenomena, making sense of that phenomena, and then sense making throughout the whole lesson, and then coming back and having discussions. Yes, it takes a lot longer. It takes a lot more than your usual typical, you do your lesson, lab, and then finish at the end in quiz or test, but it's meaningful because students are really related and connected to it.
And I can bring up the tail end on that one. Um, Coming from the elementary school, I think one of the things that has really changed about my thinking in teaching science and teaching in general is listening to students as they play. So in my lesson, they have to set up this thing. They're playing with blocks and marbles. And I think one of the things I get asked a lot is, well, how do you keep them from playing with it? And my answer usually is, I don't. Because as they play, they're expressing vocabulary about the things that they understand and the concepts that they connect to. I can build on that as a teacher. I can pull all of those moments and all of that vocabulary out and really help them to develop that into the concept around the science that we're learning. So let them play, man. Let them play.
Thank you, Mary Elizabeth. And and I'll kind of share. I come from a high school, middle school teaching background, and I got the opportunity to work with these wonderful educators as they develop their lessons. Even in the sessions where they were developing their lessons, the thoughts were flowing. The perspective that they had, not as a teacher, but also as a student, as they're developing their lesson, was really powerful to see. So we really hope that you found something useful from today's session and are inspired to log on to Tools for Teachers and try some out for yourself. With that, I'll hand it back to Amy to close us out.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you, all of you. This was an amazing presentation today. I also got to work with these amazing educators as they created these science lessons, and they're so fun, and I actually think about them often as I am working with my own kids in my life. So thank you all. And with that, thank you all for joining us today. We'll see you again in 2 weeks. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.